Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here for the last session, and I think it's the most exciting because we got to pick everybody's brain all at once. And the topic that we're going to be discussing with these incredible people is Healthspan versus Lifespan. Are we asking the wrong questions? So for the panel, we have Tina Woods, who is a global leader in health, longevity policy, and systems change. Dr. Eric Verdin, CEO of Buck Institute and one of the world's leading aging biologists. Jasmine Smith, bringing a critical translation and human-centered lens. And Keith Comito, CEO and president at Lifespan Research Institute, advanced technology project lead at the Walt Disney Company. So let's just go straight in. So to start it off, I just want to have a very general question and try to keep it to one sentence. What does success in longevity look like to you? Tina, I'm going to start with you.
So success for me is, well, making sure we're asking the right question, like what are we all trying to do here? So I would say that it is about harnessing all the latest science and technology of longevity science to deliver as much healthy years as possible. And if we get it right, you should be able to achieve both and actually achieve the ultimate goal of reducing, multi-comorbidities at the end of your life. So that's the ideal, and as much as possible, and to make sure that everyone has access to it.
Fantastic. Eric?
For me, it means improving people's lives, not only the length, but the quality of their lives. One thing that I also, a point that I would like to make in relation to this is the fact that we are, but 25 years ago when I got into the field, this was a time when the first mutations were discovered that changed the rate of aging, and we were all convinced that the world was going to explode into enthusiasm for longevity. and it didn't happen. And here we are 25, almost 30 years later, that finally I have the feeling that that enthusiasm is sparking up, and you see it in the public media, you see it everywhere. And my prediction is that we haven't seen anything yet in a way of what could happen. And one of the reasons for this is that our field is still viewed with some justified degree of skepticism by most of the public, because we haven't delivered anything. And so this is a field that's essentially premised on a big promise, which with zero achievement. I mean, not zero achievement, zero practical achievement for people. So one of my pet peeves is that we have to focus on small victories at the beginning, which is, again, not living to 150, but increasing some degree of life expectancy and quality of life for people. And then the torrent of resources, investment, big pharma, all of these people are going to come because they will, but we have to, as a field, I think sometimes, we're shooting a little bit ahead of our skis. And I really think that focusing on some attainable goal will go a long way to creating that respectability and trust in what we're trying to do.
Yeah, just before I pass it on to Jasmine, I think another point, just piggybacking on you here, is that, yes, we haven't delivered anything concrete yet, but at the same time, there has been so much noise out there and so many promises that are made and so many new treatments that don't really actually work. It's a dichotomy. It's a problem, right? Because
it's a huge problem, and I think many people here represent science, which I think is really important. I don't think, right now, at least the most visible part of the field is what I call Instagram medicine, which is, if you take this supplement, you're going to do this, or you're going to do this. Now, as you've seen, we've seen to some degree the danger of this, i.e. Epstein files, everybody. This is frankly, when something like this happens, it hurts the whole field. It hurts us, it hurts investors, and it sort of confirms people in some of their worst biases, which is, this is a field of charlatan who are just promising anything. They're just touting their supplement or whatever else they want to tout. So there is really, my reason for being somewhat so conservative is one of survival. We need to make this, the next stage, and then it will get better and better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Jasmine?
Okay, so success and longevity, right?
Yes.
Okay, so to me, this means that you're able to live as long as you want to your most optimal and wonderful self, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, if that's your inclination. It means that you don't feel like you are running out of time because of this inevitable degradation of your physical form, and that you can actually experience all that this actual physical life has to offer. And that you can do that at your own agency and time, which is kind of the ultimate dream for thousands of years. And kind of as Eric was touching on, we may or may not be like super duper far from that, but I think that's the ambition of the field. I mean, of course, everybody wants to be happy and healthy and everything, but at the end of the day, what we see as being a 120-year-old now is not exactly what most people are aspiring to. It's like, yes, it's better than nothing, but I think that we all want to kind of look like we're 25 or 30 in like 200 years. I think that's kind of like the goal. So I think that's what it means to me.
All right, Keith.
Yeah, building off of this, I'm sure we're going to address a lot of the points that Eric was bringing up and some of the other questions, but just to answer the question simply on what what I think success and longevity looks like is simply improving the ability for every person to live as long and as healthfully as they would like at the personal level, and at the societal level paired to that, the creation of better social contracts with governments and society to make sure that that chance is being given to the maximal amount of people as possible.
That is great, and actually ties nicely to my next question, because when we start talking about society and all of the changes, if all of these people are actually living longer potentially, which is, if they're not healthier, is a huge burden for the economy. Well, if you extend actually the health span, then you actually improving the economy. So my question next, and we can start with you, Keith, is health span versus lifespan actually a useful distinction? Because in my line of thought is, if someone is living healthier and they are still healthy by 100, without frailty, without loss of muscle mass, with all of the organs working perfectly fine, would that mean possibly that they're also living for longer?
Yeah, I think this is like a critical point, and I get the sense that maybe there might be a little daylight between me and some of the other panelists here on this, where I actually, while I totally agree that focusing on health span is super important narratively in a lot of cases, I actually don't think saying that one of our aims is lifespan extension is something that we need to run away from, as long as we speak about it in a very sane way, that's not unproductive hype and over-promising. And on the contrary, I think if you know where to look for it, and I'm writing a chapter in a book right now that should be coming out in a few months that will be about this. Like, there is compelling polling data and other data that show that the public is actually broadly in favor of life extension, full stop, even without additional health span qualifications, as long as that is disaggregated from other issues that people have a negative response to, like a fear of oligarchy, or it's not going to be for them, or it's not feasible. And I think once these issues are disaggregated, the public is actually broadly in favor of this, because people want to be inspired. They want something to reach for. So, this is where I'm not necessarily in favor of anti-aging as a term, even though I think it's fine. I think we want to be for something, right? For happiness, for fitness, for spending time with your loved ones. And I think as long as you speak about that in a very, logical, sane way, like, people are on board for this. So that's basically my opinion there.
Anyone would like to have other comments on this?
I mean, I think the most important question, people talk about achieving maximum lifespan, achieving immortality, but I think the question you have to really ask at the beginning or first is, what is a life worth living to you? Because in the end, we are all motivated by our own reasons for wanting to keep hanging on, and we do keep hanging on for all sorts of reasons. I mean, we've seen that over and over again. People with cancer want to live till they can see their first grandchild. The power of the mind over the body is actually quite extraordinary. So I think that's a really, really important question. And I mean, I think, Eric, you even mentioned some stats which are a little bit different, I think, from what Keith had mentioned just now in terms of that question. I mean, would you want to live forever? And I think if you reframe the question, would you like to live a very long time in good health so you can actually do the things that you love or like to do? And I think that reflects what Jasmine was saying. I think this, in the end, is the ultimate question, is, you know, what can we do to make, and functionally, spiritually, all the things that Jasmine mentioned, are we able to carry out? So I think that is fundamentally what most people, I think, can relate to who are perhaps outside the sort of the communities that we tend to circulate in. But I think, but ultimately, we have to understand human behavior. I mean, that is the biggest thing, that's the hardest thing to crack, actually, with all the pills and all the things that may come out of this wonderful research. People have to take them, they have to believe in them, and they have to make a difference. So I think, you know, I think in the end, we are very, very powerfully motivated by what gives us meaning, purpose, and joy in our lives. So I think that is ultimately, and I think, Keith, you mentioned this book. It may be that we're writing for the same book, the Nature book on radical life extension. So it's like the big question is, like, we have this possibility of living a very long time if we get this all right. And we also have, on the other side, other stuff that's going on. AI is going to take all of our jobs. What the hell are we going to be doing with all this time in our life? We have to find a life and things to do that give us meaning and purpose. It's like a really, really, really big question that has to be asked.
Yeah.
I just would like maybe to, I think we're pretty much in agreement. There's one area where I think we might be in disagreement is when I hear the term radical life extension, my question is, where's the data? And what evidence do we have that we can actually do this? We cannot even do it in small animal models. So talking about radical, this is where I think I have to differ. And I have to say, let's not talk about radical life extension until we even have a glimpse that we can actually do it, because we don't have it today. One last point, and so in some way, you know, we do talk about longevity at the Buck. We talk about increasing healthy living, and we don't put a limit on it. So we just don't give a number, because it's sort of, you know, I can always up someone. If you say 150, I'm going to say 160, or I'm going to say 190, which is all nonsense. Not that we're never going to be able to do it, but we don't have any evidence that we're actually going to be able to do it. So I think we have to be careful with our words, because they carry a lot of weight in society. And while we might be exciting a subset of people by saying 150, we also turn off a whole group of other people who are a little more educated, and we realize that there's no evidence for this. It's all just big bluster and so on. One last point you made, Keith, that I thought was really important is our field right now suffers from, the whole longevity field in general suffers from a perception problem from the public, which is medicine by the healthy for the wealthy.
Yeah.
And I think there is nothing further from the truth, at least the way we think about it, because we have in the U.S. a society which is getting sicker and sicker, wealthier and wealthier. We're like 40th in the in the world in terms of health of our population, and so when we talk about you know, longevity, I'm worried about the perception that it's only if you can spend $100,000 for some unique stem cell therapy, and I think the idea. One thing that we talk about all the time, how do we find the lowest common, cheapest denominator that is going to increase the largest number of lives? So, and I think that, I love the fact that you brought this up.
Just to quickly piggyback off of that, I think a point that advocates in our field could make more often, right, is the natural equity promoting effect of finally successfully delivered longevity promoting therapies. You know, one of the points that Martin Luther King was making in the Poor People's Campaign, one of the last things he did before he unfortunately perished, was making the point that the burdens of an aging society are disproportionately borne by minorities, by women, by the poor. So don't get me wrong, we still got to do this in an equitable way, but I think it is an important point to note that there's something inherent in the nature of this work that is equity promoting, and that's part of the wonderful dream that we're trying to achieve.
So, if I could,
Yes, go please.
And I think you use the word dream. I think, you know, all of us probably do want to get maximum access to all the wonderful fruits of this innovation, the science, and all the rest of it. I mean, it's a human instinct to want to share and be generous and all the rest of it. But I think we have to be realistic, and we have to just recognize that we live in a world full of inequities, full of infrastructure problems, full of barriers to progress. I mean, you mentioned the US. I mean, it's declining life expectancy, actually. I mean, how does that happen in a nation that spends far more as a percentage of their GDP on healthcare than any other nation in the world? There's some serious systemic infrastructural issues at stake here. Lots of vested interests and all the rest of it that we know about. But I think going back to your point, Eric, about the evidence, I mean, if you look at the evidence that we've got now, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the Exposome project. We have an enormous amount of evidence right now on what are the major drivers of poor health, which we're not even tackling, which would have far more impact at a world level than any of the work that we're doing at the moment in the labs. I mean, yes, of course, we need this, and we need to have the future, and we need to do all this work and this innovation. Make sure that it reaches as many people as possible, of course, but there's so much we have to do right now.
Yeah. Well,
it has far more evidence.
Yeah, we already know, right? So get your foundations right, and then build upon everything else. But we almost like waiting for this miracle drug, so we don't have to build on those foundations. And it's just madness, because, as you said, you already have the data, and it just comes across, but we already know this, but are you actually doing it, right?
So I think there's also a question of, we still think in terms of individual agency. It's a very US thing. CEO of your own health, But no, we are moving on. It is not just about individual agency anymore. You cannot fix all the problems that are dragging your health down. It has become a collective problem. Yes. We have to see it that way.
Yeah,
I can just add to that quickly. That's a great point, and that's why I was so excited to hear about this exposome research and that it's gaining traction, because some of these changes, as you mentioned, are actually needed at the government level, at the society level, at the whole infrastructure, the way that we build buildings, the way that we actually regulate water and air quality, and the food that's actually allowed and legal to be sold to people and easy to access for children and for everyone. And our societies are not built with longevity and health span in mind. They're just built on just how much money can you earn as fast as possible. It's almost predatory and just burning into the ground rather than actually elevating. And if we could actually get that average life expectancy up to these maximum limits, then the possibility of more so-called radical life extension becomes a lot more believable. I mean, at one point in time, the human beings, flying in the air like birds that was fantasy, and it was a million years away. And then all of a sudden, we were doing it, and now it's just commonplace and normal. And if we actually start to see people that are 90 and 100 and 110, walking around gardening, driving, shopping, without any cognitive decline and, without disease, then all of a sudden that next leap becomes, less of a leap of faith and more like a natural next step in the evolution of humanity.
Yeah, no, that's great. Go
I
for it.
love the fact that she brought up the point of the flying, because quite often it is brought up by people who say, well, you don't know what's going to happen and how things are going to change. But my counter argument to this is flying is a problem with 3 dimensions. It's the speed of the wing, and it's at the distance that the air travels on the top and at the bottom of the wing. So 3 dimensions. When you compare this to biological aging, 14 trillion cells, each of them with 25,000 different transcripts, hundreds of thousands of metabolites. We're dealing with a problem which is so much more complicated. So I always tell people, let's just, it was solved, flying was solved like when one smart guy realized, okay, you have to have the air traveling faster at the bottom of the wing than at the top, and it's going to create a depression. So that's one aspect. But quite often I wish we would sort of take inspiration from the people who are building the rockets. Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, all 3 of them are not talking about intergalactic travel, if you've noticed. They're all talking about space travel. And when we talk about radical life extension, if they imagine that them as businesses had started talking about intergalactic travel, people would have said, you're crazy. It's not going to happen. And one argument that they would make is, well, if we could travel at the speed of light, we could actually do intergalactic travel. The only small problem is that we don't travel at the speed of light. And we're not going to do this for a very long time. And I would say the same argument can be made for the field of longevity medicine. We have no tools right now to change radical life extension.
Yeah.
We're so far from this.
Yeah.
So
I guess
there's just, I think to me, again, it bears on our credibility. Imagine that Jeff Bezos and all of those guys had talked about intergalactic travels. They would have never would have raised money. They would have been considered quacks and not taken seriously. So in some way, let's learn to walk before we run.
Yeah, no, that is a great point, and I think just following up on this, do you think then that that's the case that is happening right now, where we're not actually, like, we are scientists, we talk about targeting aging, but at the end of the day, we're stacking up on diseases and we're treating diseases just because how the system is built, because, you know, the infrastructure, the FDA approval, so we have to target a disease, not aging. So do you think that potentially that's where we're stacking up like little wins and not really shifting, or?
I think the premise of the longevity field, at least from our perspective in terms of geroscience, is that we're targeting aging as a risk factor. And so if you think about heart disease, for example, the way people have targeted heart disease is, so we are drastically different from the rest of biomedical research. If you think about heart disease, the way it's been targeting is by decreasing cholesterol, decreasing, changing risk factors that are actually specific to heart disease. What people forget is that the major risk factor for heart disease and Alzheimer's and all of them is aging. And so when we say aging, that means specific pathways that drive aging: insulin signaling, autophagy, senescent cells. So I think there's something completely different from what the other people in the biomedical field. So I don't want to be reduced to just another group of people studying disease, because I think we take a completely different perspective on this, which I think has the potential to change all of them together.
Absolutely. Keith?
Yeah, I think this is actually a good segue, Eric, into sort of the topic of biomarkers, right? Because, you know, you can't change what you can't measure. And maybe where I'm a little bit more optimistic is that maybe there are ways to simplify this, 14 trillion cell problem, right? To look at the entire body and, even more than that, mind in aggregate. And this is why personally, in conversation I'm having with those in governmental agencies, is on aggregate biomarkers of functional health and resilience, right? Because, and you don't necessarily even need to have that conversation about whether we need to call aging a disease or is it aging or not. You can just call it exactly what it is, non-invasively detectable functional decline, right? And I think that could be very meaningful. I mean, we all can do this as human beings. You could look at someone and go, ooh, they don't look so good for their age, or, oh, they're doing really well. Their voice sounds really good. So I feel like if we can really lock down like standardized metrics there, I think there might be some wins that we can tease out that, actually some things actually do have the effect that people actually care about, which is improving their function, right? And that's, going to what Tina's saying. Last thing I'll say, Tina, really quick, is that another aspect of this is I think at the societal level, we also need better metrics. GDP isn't the best metric of the health of the society, right? I think we could come up with better versions of the happiness score, human flourishing, that are very comprehensive, that would be very useful.
So just a couple of things to mention on that. So first of all, I think the point you made about intrinsic capacity, and I think your point about functional, in the end, we've already got some really good functional biomarkers that actually give us an enormous amount of information on our health status and our likelihood to live a very long, healthy, happy life. So we've already got that. So I think, but to your point about the GDP, I remember when I went on your podcast about 7 years ago, I think it was, and that was the point I made. I said, in the end, it comes down to the incentive structure that are driving the system that we have. And I'm afraid capitalism, money, as its own single goal, is obviously not enough. We need to be thinking differently about what in the end is the lives, and how do we develop the incentives to create the structures and the values in society that we can sign up to, that will then influence our commercial models, our incentive structures and all the rest of it, because that at the moment is what is really, that's really at the heart of a lot of this. So, and I remember reading a comment, it was like, oh, who is that socialist on your podcast, saying these things? And I'm not a socialist, actually. But it is actually introducing that question, what in the end really matters to human people, because that in the end is what really counts, actually.
Just to quickly build on that, Tina, I think it's important to note that this isn't just like navel gazing. Like, this can have specific like policy prescriptions. So one that I've talked about with some, Congress people and others that's a bit spicy politically is, on the subject of retirement age, right? Obviously people have very, very strong feelings about that. You saw what happened in France, right, with the yellow vests, right? But, right now, just as one example, the incentives of the governments, or many governments, are at odds with people on that issue, right? Governments want people to work longer and get more taxes. People want to maybe work less and relax some more. So I think if we thought about it, we could easily come up with some policy prescriptions that could align those things, right? What if you made something called the Protection of Retirement Age Act or something like that, right? Where the retirement age could not be raised until and unless the equitably distributed, quality-adjusted life years of society are raised by double whatever you're trying to raise the retirement age. That's very reductive, but my point is that you can use these sort of ideas to come up with actual policy ideas. Yeah.
One thing that maybe following up your other point about these functional markers, I'm all for it, by the way, but one thing that is happening that I see sometimes that is a little bit worrisome is people confuse a marker whether it's associative or causative. And in terms of functional markers, for example, anybody has heard about grip strength. and I heard that, not to name him, Brian Johnson actually had bought a special apparatus to increase his grip strength, which completely defeats the point, because you can have an insane grip strength and have no leg muscle and no gluteus, which is your biggest muscle. So in some way, the same thing, there are studies showing that people who floss their teeth actually live 4 years longer on average, and I don't think that there's any evidence that flossing your teeth, it improves your mouth hygiene, but in terms of giving you 4 extra years of life, it probably indicates someone who's more attentive to their health in general. So in some way, I think the point that you're making is great, but what these functional markers still do not address is what are we going to target molecularly? What drugs are we going to be using, deploying to increase these functional markers? So you still need a lot of basic research.
Yeah, just one quick point, and then I'll pass it over to Jasmine. What I think is important too is even if to your point, you might not understand mechanistically what's occurring, right? But imagine if you just had, as part of every clinical trial, standardized a kiosk that you could walk through and within 3 minutes can do a whole variety of non-invasive, metrics. I'll talk about it in my talk tomorrow, so I won't go too spoilery on it, but that's more than enough to detect the deviation between chronological age and biological age. So even if we just did that, that would put a layer of serendipity on top of the entire clinical trial system to then flag, oh, something's going on here. Let's do a follow-up study and really dig into it, right?
Yeah. Jasmine, do you want to?
Yeah, I think definitely it is partly a technology question, as you mentioned. We have these wearable devices and all of these more dynamic measurements, which will be able to generate data at a lot faster rate. And then, of course, with AI applied, we can definitely learn more about that foundational biology. But then there's that question of, is there such a thing as over-tracking? Can we over-monitor things and lose that focus on, oh, do I actually feel good? How am I enjoying the life? Or am I just constantly looking at this thing and it told me my sleep was bad, so now I'm going to sleep worse because I've been obsessing over it and, all that kind of thing. So, there's definitely an interesting balance to strike there. But actually the original kind of name for this conference was going to be functional and performance longevity, because that's kind of where the health spanners versus life spanners, quote unquote, that's where the intersection point is everybody wants to have that function and performance throughout their life.
Yeah. Okay. So you touched on, Keith, on chronological versus biological age. And I think one of the reasons why majority of the markers that we have are actually measuring chronological age is because it's very easy to track, right? But when you're talking about Healthspan, which is what you actually want, or, knowing that your biology is fine and you're going to be able to function and you're going to be able to be at that top level for as long as possible, it's hard. It's hard to define because you have to sort of associate to usually a disease, right? So the mortality clocks or, the clocks, the third generation clocks associated with biological age, they are measuring disease endpoints, right? So How do you see us coming around this problem and actually starting to measure aging as a whole thing and not subdividing as we currently are?
Yeah, I'll start us off. So this is a very, interesting question that the field's been wrestling with, obviously, right? There's some aspect of, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole in terms of FDA indications, although, Eric mentioned a useful one on sarcopenia and frailty. But I think, actually at a sister event to the Biomarkers of Aging Consortium event, I think early in the year, a clinician, Paul Ridker, was there. And he made some very interesting points that kind of lit the room on fire a little bit, where he was talking about the Horvath clocks and these kind of things. And from his background, I believe it was with getting statins to the market and sort of stuff. He basically was like, that's not the way to go about this, to get things through to through the FDA and actually into the clinics, right? It's like you need functionally clinically relevant markers that are meaningful, right? So I think the conversation that we could have here is, as mentioned earlier, I don't think we need to have are we calling it aging or not? Is aging a disease or not? I think if you had, some kind of metrics that in composite can detect multi-morbidities, and then you can tie, 3 or 4 of those metrics that are already indications for individual diseases, and then the combination of these things could be, whatever the proxy you want to call it for aging. And that's kind of, as I understand it, sort of the angle that Nir Barzilai was kind of going with on the TAME trial. And I think there are ways to expand upon that idea to do something interesting, kind of just jump over the bottleneck.
Yeah. Jasmine, do you have anything to say? No? Eric?
Another point that one can make in relation to this is what is a disease and what is health? And traditionally people think about, health is the absence of disease, but I don't think
really.
It has to be a much more broader definition, because you could be healthy until your blood sugar goes above 100 and then you have prediabetes, and this can happen over 1 year. But the process we know started 15, 20 years earlier. So I think everyone in this room is probably familiar with the hallmarks of aging that Guido Krömer wrote. He wrote another paper which received much less attention, which I think is even more interesting. It's so-called the hallmark of health. And so he defines a whole series of domains that go awry during the sort of degradation of health. And there's another article that I think, so I would encourage anybody to read this the hallmark of health. I think it should, in our field, should be thought about a lot more. And what is the spread between being extremely healthy or not so healthy, and what do we call this? The other article is an article by Martin Picard, who wrote also about really sort of pointing to how our society and our medical system is organized around disease and not at all around health. Even though we have a National Institute of Health, it's only preoccupying itself with disease. It doesn't really discuss health. So there's really a framework shift that has to occur in medical schools and population. And I think as a field, we can play a role by leading the debate and the discussion.
So just as a quick anecdote to that, one of the most interesting projects I ever did was actually doing an interesting community health project in a very deprived area in the UK. And I was literally speaking to scout leaders and church leaders and what have you about what they thought health was and what they should achieve, for their community. And it was commissioned by the local NHS, and the difference in what the NHS thought would come out of that research and what the individuals of population and health to normal punters, normal people, was all about the points that we were making earlier. It's being able to do what you really love and to be able to carry out your life on your own terms. And it was purely to do with that. So it's obviously much more than physical health. And it kind of, again, it sort of symbolizes this disconnect that we have with a very sick care-based model of health with a certain system attached to it and what really people want from it. Yeah.
Okay, so based on all of this and everything that was said regarding, measuring, one point that we need to sort of come into an agreement is when we're running trials that are anti-aging trials. How do we know that we've reached that point, and what measure should we use? And are we there? Do we have one? Or what do you think could be? or like the promising one.
I'll just parrot what I was saying earlier is I think one of the biggest, like, lowest hanging fruit that maybe the field has lost the forest for the trees a little bit is in these like non-invasive physiological functional biomarkers. Because I think, again, if the question is there a deviation between chronological age and biological age, and is something going on, I think that could be acted on quickly and now, and then sort of whatever the good version of a Trojan horse is, it could be that to like open the gates for like just broader use of all biomarkers like everywhere. And one thing that I just wanted to note too that's related to the whole FDA, clinical indication side of things is something that's relevant about the question of is aging a disease or not is, to be a disease, it has to affect a subpopulation, right? Not everyone. So that's a challenge that aging as we know it has, that affects everyone. But it stands to reason that you should, through the right use of these kind of markers that we're talking about, you could probably define an accelerated aging phenotype that would affect the subpopulation. And then, to us, it's really aging, but, it would kind of serve that goal, right? So.
Well, this one kind of depends on, how quickly, these emerging therapies are kind of actually working, being demonstrated. But I'll share an anecdote. There's a conference that's been running for about 10 years that maybe some of you have heard of called RADFest. And it's kind of like the revolution against aging and death. And, it's kind of a mixture, of a little bit of like some unproven things, but also a lot of like the scientific as well. So it's kind of like a blend of everybody that's into the radical life extension. And so last year, Rejuve.AI actually had a booth there. We had a really fun one with a, spin the wheel and grip strength testing and all this kind of thing. And one of the most surprising things to me was that there was actual like 80 and 90-year-olds coming up to the booth that are like, they're looking for the life extension right now. They're looking for what chance can they have. So I think that that's probably going to be one of the fastest ways that we can actually see if we've reversed aging or not, is if this population actually takes something and it makes some kind of dramatic change that we can visibly see, because it's going to happen a lot quicker in somebody who's 90 than in somebody who's 35.
Maybe I'll just add to this. If you start from the functional point of view, what people really want is mobility in their brain. And not be sick all the time. And I think when you look at what the X Prize has chosen as the 3 organ categories, in some way, that's the result of all of these discussions is, well, your immune system, your musculoskeletal function, and your
brain.
And your brain. And so there's another study which is quite interesting by Tony Wiscoré, has invented these new proteomics biomarkers that he can measure. He's built organ-specific clocks that is able to tell which organ is aging at what rate out of a drop of blood. And when they applied this to the UK Biobank, where they had the life history of these people, they were able to say, okay, what organ's failure is predicting early death? And there were 2 organs that were dominant above everything else, was the brain and the immune system. So in some way, when I think about, what should we measure in terms of the future to define really what is health without measuring everything, because I agree there's a cost issue, there's time issue. Nobody wants to go through all of these tests, although some of us do. The large public is going to want something that's easy and actionable. So I would say those are the ones that I probably would focus on.
Amazing.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything that's just been said, and it just reinforces how it's such a system issue that we're talking about. We have to understand the system, and we're a very complicated system. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
Some of us more than others.
Just to build off that point on like immune system function and brain aging, right? I think it's, a statistic that is often thrown around by advocates, something like, 75% of all diseases are, have aging as the primary risk factor. But I think it's just worth noting as advocates that number is probably closer to like 95% or something. Because, even car accidents are age-related, immune system, COVID, age-related. So I think like everything is an age-related disease. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the points that constantly people ask me, just because once they know that I work with aging, they're like, what should I test and what should I take? I'm like, hold on. Let's slow down. But yeah, it's such a misconception. It's a misunderstood point. And okay, so shifting a little bit around that to more of the policy or interventions itself, what is actually missing in the, say, medicine or politically to get aging interventions to be treated the same level as disease interventions are?
Yeah, I think it's going back to what was said earlier about the need for the reform at the actual the medical school level. We have to actually change the entire curriculum to be focused on that Healthspan outcome, and also at the societal level as well, because we're still going on the old system, from 100 years ago, where the biggest thing was stopping people from dying from infectious diseases. And now that we've kind of come such a long way on that, we have to completely shift the focus. We have to teach people about these new types of sciences that have just emerged within the last 30 years or so. So I think if we we start there. We have to kind of re-educate a lot of people, and then we can start to kind of see that propagate throughout the system.
Yeah, to build off of that, I'll take this question from the angle of I really think that there's actually more of a role for societal perception of aging in this. And this is where I agree with some of what the other panelists have said, where I think this, as soon as we have something, anything, that has an undeniable, clearly visible effect on aging or age reversal, I think that will immediately catalyze broad public adoption in a way that nothing else will. All those of, from being on the front lines of advocacy, I've had thousands of conversations with people where all, you know them probably, what about overpopulation? What about I'm going to be bored, right? And I've never had it once be the case where I'm talking to someone, even people like cardinals in the Vatican and such, where once they get to, it might be feasible at some point to start making headway here, where they don't immediately jump to it being a societal good to do it. So I really think feasibility is having an outsized roadblock there. So I think that's key. And a lot of these other objections are just kind of like coping mechanisms because it's impossible. But the second it seems feasible, though, a lot of those kind of fall away. And then just another point I want to make on this is, I'm not sure if anyone here saw the Disney Plus show Limitless with Chris Hemsworth, and that was made by Darren Aronofsky. And what was going on in that show, I don't think we would call it serious aging research, more like cold plungers and this kind of stuff, right? But I will say, the public receptivity was very high to that. It was pretty good, on explaining the science, and it convinced my parents more than anything I ever said, right? So imagine if there was a season 2 of that show, when whatever the first actually working aging therapy is, and you're watching Chris Hemsworth through digital biomarkers, actually gray hair becomes blonde and losing wrinkles. I think that would be massive, and make it clear to politicians that the Overton window has moved on this, and that the constituents want this, and this would be a political winner for you to support the public in getting access to these things. Yeah.
So what you're talking about is we want that big, massive win, kind of like what happened with GLP-1 agonists, obviously with weight loss, because that was so dramatic. So it's kind of but I guess to Eric's point earlier, but the problem is where they're going to come from, because it looks kind of difficult to see where this is going to come from, because we still haven't got anything really that's doing anything that dramatic in terms of longevity. So that is the first problem. But I was just going to basically, completely echo Jasmine's points. Our problem is that we have a system rooted in sick care, and to move towards a prevention model. And believe you me, I have tried in the UK, and I can tell you it is bloody tough, because it is just so mired in all the reasons why not to change. Even with the socioeconomic arguments, just telling the nation, you've got to do this, you've got to stop pouring money in a healthcare system that is broken and start preventing people from getting ill. But it's just impossible because they have no money, and for all the reasons that we know. So I think this is where the opportunity is in places like here and other places around the world. I'm a really great believer in FOMO. Just show how it can be done, and then everyone else will do it. And that's what the Middle Eastern countries are keen on. That's what they want to show. They know prevention, get a much bigger bang for your buck. Prevent ill health, keep your population healthy and happy from 65, 85. You will have a much more prosperous nation. So that's kind of I think, what we need.
Yeah, just a quick point on that. So I am also on the board of the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, which does a lot of the policy-facing work, Montana and all that mentioned earlier. And I think that there is a real place for that, right, where this is where I think the value of like good advocacy and really clean like data visualizations that make these socioeconomic cases like undeniable, because I think it can create that FOMO. You know, like one chart that we have on our site on Lifespan.io shows the life expectancy not just based on states but counties, right? So you could see how in the right room that could make constituents go, why are New Yorkers living like 10 years longer than Floridians? Like, what's going on here? You know, like that kind of stuff.
I completely agree with everything that's been said. And one of the problems, I think, also as scientists and people who are working in the field, is that we are ceding the voice to influencers. And I think there's a responsibility from all of us to be much more visible. And I'm going to be, by the way, I'm going to be a lot more visible than I was, because I realized during the past year how the NIH was attacked with impunity. And I was expecting, this is the system that actually gave us a doubling of our life expectancy in large part over the last 100 years. And no one actually came up to defend it. And there were threats to decrease it by 50%, and no one said anything. I thought this is really a reflection of a collective failure from all scientists and people who are working in the field. Another point I would like to make is with respect to what is going to make a difference. I think it is one case, and again, I'm not a socialist like Tina. I live in the US and moved from Europe to the US. This is my best sort of card-carrying, not a socialist. But there's one case in which actually government can come to the rescue where profit-making does not work as an incentive. So the whole model of biotech works in many cases, but we're talking about easy wins. And I always give the example of the TAME trial. It was a perfect example where we have an existing drug that costs absolutely nothing, that shows protective effect, that could have shown an effect, was approved by the FDA as almost the first anti-aging trial, looking at multiple morbidities, and they could never get it funded. One reason why is the reluctance of the traditional medical establishment to this idea. And second one, it should have been something that the NIH director said, we're going to do it. Yeah. And we have enough of these compounds to test right now, including a myriad of supplements that are showing powerful effect that no biotech is ever going to test. Because there's no profit to be made. The supplement companies will not invest because those trials are too expensive. And for $10 million, one could do some of these trials. I mean, I cannot imagine, I cannot understand why this is not something the government doesn't take up as an issue and just decide this is working, this is not working, versus allowing all the supplement makers to benefit from some of these drugs without any
proof or evidence. Yes, yeah, it's very exciting. Also, just going on the supplements and the new therapies, the exercise mimetic ones that are coming now. Finally, I feel like GLP-1 didn't cut it because it was just reducing everything, including muscle mass. But now there's some new ones coming up that are actually maintaining the strength in the muscle. So I think that's exciting in that side of you. But okay. I know that you have something to say, but we have short time. You can finish up and say and then answer this final question. If you have to bet in one therapy that you think would change aging progression or will be the anti-aging therapy, what would it be and why?
Okay, it's a complicated question because there's a lot of different ways to take this, but I'm going to try to answer this question from like the broadest way of like, scientific progress, societal effect, all this kind of stuff. Apropos to where we are here right now, I would love to see, and this is one of the things that we're working on at Lifespan Research Institute, subject to funding, so help us, is a truly, first ever, truly decentralized clinical trial for something that would be easy to see how it could become cheap and free to everybody in the world. So my pick for that is actually an improvement of the very promising, but still needs more evidence, results on non-invasive interventions for Alzheimer's disease, just based on stimulus like lights and sounds. And one of the technologies that I've invented is a way to improve this, right? So let me just put it this way, right? You know, like, I forget exactly the numbers, but the US government over the past 30 years has in one way or another spent something like $1 trillion on Alzheimer's research, on, you know, very familiar modalities that seem to keep failing, you know, beta amyloid, et cetera. So what kind of earthquake do you think it would be if a bunch of like regular people on the internet with blinking lights and sounds actually demonstrated reversal of Alzheimer's disease in any way? I think that would be an earthquake. And I've also had that told to me directly from, like, you know, heads of departments at the NIH, that if something like that happened, it would change the game, where they want to adopt these new modalities, but it's basically like, hey, we're calcified in our system, but if you all can basically embarrass us, then we can change. So I think, again, maybe there's different answers on like the core biology here, but I think something like that would have like an outsized tactical effect on just changing the entire conversation.
Jasmine.
I guess my answer is that it's not just going to be one thing. It's probably going to be either some combinations or things that are applied at different stages depending on what the indication is. I'm actually very interested to hear from Unlimited Bio. They will be speaking tomorrow, so we'll get to see. There's a lot of other exciting trials going on. I know epigenetic reprogramming is coming into trials soon with David Sinclair's lab. There's also another trial going right now with a company called Cyclarity to remove atherosclerotic plaque for the first time in history that we know of. So yeah, I think that as we start to see the results of these, we'll kind of be able to know whether or not we're going to have that promise in indications that we're actually looking for, that wow and that aha moment. I think we're going to find out those answers very, very soon, so fingers crossed.
I think we have the first ones, which are GLP-1 agonists. I mean, by all accounts, and actually according to the pharma companies, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, both at the RDD last year, both called their drugs as longevity medicine. So I think all the data points to this. I got into an argument with my good friend Carl Flager, who said decreasing obesity is not a longevity drug, which I vehemently disagree, because I think we're not, you know, you're making a judgment that a person is obese because of their own fault. So obesity is a disease, just like many things. If you're decreasing the weight of people across the spectrum, you're going to increase lifespan across the spectrum. So I think I try to stay away from these sort of very sort of defined limit of what is a longevity drug or not a longevity drug. Now the counter argument for the GLP-1 agonist is their cost. But again, here, these costs are going to decrease in the future when the drugs are becoming, the patents are expiring. And by the way, right now you can buy many of these drugs, at least in the US, from compounding pharmacies where you can actually get a GLP agonist for $50 a month. Yeah. And so it's doable today. And the FDA has not been cracking down on this. So I think even though these discoveries did not come from the longevity field, I think we should be opportunistic and we should claim them as our own. Yeah. And I think there are multiple trials now ongoing that are really going to explore all the different domain in which this protection can affect. But we might have them already in which I think could change already. By the way, there were no pharma companies at ARDD for many years, and I mean, you've been to that as well. And all of a sudden last year, there were two. And the two biggest ones, Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, and Morten, the organizer, told me that every single drug company now is in line next year. They all want to be there. So everybody's paying attention. And I think we might have seen the change that we were all hoping for. It might happen sooner than later.
Just before Tina, just speaking on the GLP-1 drugs, what do you think, though, regarding one, you have to keep using to keep the suppress hunger. So it's sort of like something that is a long term, you know, and then when you stop, you actually go back and you bounce back your weight. And then second is that most of the weight that is lost is actually not from fat, but from muscle.
Good, great point, because I heard Tina making sort of bashing the GLP agonist, and so I'll address not completely, but like any new drug. First, one thing that's always important to remember is that there are no drug without side effects. You know, we're talking about metformin. I get approached all the time by 25-year-old, should I go on metformin? I said, yes, if you want to lose your testosterone, that's a great way to do it. If you're 65-year-old and you're on metformin and you want to supplement testosterone, yes. But if you're 25-year-old, your testicles are going to shrink, and good luck. So there are no drugs without side effect. That's really the rule number one, including GLP-1 agonists. Now, a lot has been made about the fact that they induce some amount of weight loss, but the studies show that is not caused by, there's nothing specific about GLP-1 agonists in terms of losing more muscle than fat. It is simply a reflection of weight loss. If you put someone on a gastric bypass, which was the old ways, they lose exactly the same proportion of fat versus muscle. And the key thing is for people to go on GLP agonists to have protein supplementation and strength training. And then all the evidence points that there's no more muscle loss than from any other rapid weight loss. And the other thing is, I think, the traditional obesity field uses these drugs at too high concentrations, so people lose 40, 50 pounds over a 6 months period. I would say if they were able to do this in a more progressive way, you could salvage muscle. And then the last point was that you were asking me about the point that you bashed them.
Well, they're developing all these other drugs to cope with the side effects.
Yes.
Basically on a cocktail of drugs, which are going to be great for drug companies.
So the question was, are people going to have to be on this for life?
Yes.
And I think, yes.
That's
the point. The point is, so is that not a problem? I think that question to me sort of raises a misunderstanding about human biology, because some people are bothered by the idea, I'm going to have to be on a drug for the rest of my life, where we take statins for the rest of our life. Women who take estrogen supplementation take that for the rest of their lives. The question assumes that we are sort of perfect evolutionary product, and the idea that we would use a drug as a crutch is just contrary to this. But from my perspective, we are misfits in terms of our evolutionary history and the environment in which we live. We have evolved under nutrition, nutrient lacking. So we are always hungry. When there's food, we tend to eat too much. So this is not, this is something that's wrong with us, in my opinion. and look at the number of obesity. It tells you that none of these people can be weak of mind. They're just living in an environment where food is rich, abundant, and meant to actually trigger their worst instinct, which is to eat too much.
Yeah.
So I will be very quick, but this is the point I was going to make. We cannot ignore the fact of our evolutionary biology. We were meant to hunt food and run around and be hungry and actually have a little bit of hardship in our life. There was a reward at the end of it, so you were prepared to do this for the reward. We're now taking the reward out of all the eating, GLP-1, which is actually a big problem. It's making lives very boring. And like sex addiction, alcohol addiction, all these other indications that they're being trialed for. It's basically recognizing that we are addicted to pleasure, and we want to, and once you get out of that, then it's kind of, you sort of wrestle with this question, well, what is life all about, actually? But what my simple sort of, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, let's face it, right? So, I'm being facetious. You know what I mean? So the point is, my simple, and I'm going to be a little bit silly with my sort of intervention. I mean, basically, it's exactly this point. You talked about the exercise mimetic. If we walked 20 minutes a day, all of us, that would have an absolutely colossal effect on our health at a population health level. It addresses mood, weight, need for movement, It absolutely attacks all the hallmarks of aging, all the rest of it. So my suggestion for Infinita is design a wallet that you can use where you get some reward points, you get a few lives every time you take a 20-minute walk, and you can get your coffee or whatever it is, something healthy. Nudge us towards a healthier way of living. I mean, that would just be so much easier than all the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, getting paid for a walk, that's all.
But why not? So I'll just tell you, one simple thing. So there is a company called Sweatcoin. I know the CEO. They have actually done some work with the NHS, working with very deprived communities, very overweight. And let me tell you, when you get people with a Sweatcoin wallet, and if they if they get a reward, whatever it is that they want, and it has to be healthy, they will do the steps. And they had a huge impact on the population, on the level of the community. So that's what I would say.
I just want to build on that really quick. I'll talk tomorrow about some gamification aspects of this, but one thing I wanted to just mention here is that, to circle back on functional biomarkers again and the utility of all biomarkers, is if now we're going to look at the question from like the core biology of aging and like what's the big thing, right? No amount, don't get me wrong, it's great, let's do it, but no amount of walking is going to make you live beyond 120 years old, right? So at some point, the field, and maybe we're just not there yet, right? But we're going to need to be able to employ the right combination of diagnostics to tease out first order from second order effects, right? As a goofy example, right? If I was doing a clinical trial and I gave everybody cocaine, right? Maybe they'll be more peppy and, they might get some, functional benefits from moving around more, but that's certainly not affecting your core mechanisms of aging in a positive way, right? So I think we need to disaggregate at some point, but again, maybe we're not there yet, but I think that's important because, I think it's fair to say that a broad subset of our community, and one of the points I'll make in that chapter is that actually a larger segment of the populace than you might think is interested in seeing, going to space 100 years hence. So I think, it will be important at some point to be able to disaggregate these things so we can understand what is actually able to, stop or reverse the damages of aging, not just slow it down.
But it's still about understanding humans' motivations.
Oh, yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it? Because
Yeah.
in the end, you'll take these amazing quick fix drugs if it's actually going to make you able to live the life that you really want to have. And that's
The point I quite often make is that, and actually to reconcile your point and my point, is that make sure you do everything you can today so that you live long enough to live by these discoveries, and which is, and that's something that all of us can do today. There was another point. Huh? What's that?
Don't die.
Don't die, yes. There's, Dan Buettner, who sort of is responsible for the concept of the blue zone, makes the point very strongly that it's extremely hard for humans to motivate themselves to change their behavior. Otherwise, we would not have, more than 50% of the population being obese. People would just stop eating. We can't, and people would exercise. They don't. So his argument is that a lot of it is along your line, what you were saying, that we should construct a society that really nudges people in the right direction. Yeah. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Both countries have worse rates of obesity and diabetes than all of us. And actually, they are really pioneering a change at the level of population. But having traveled there, I'm always amazed. You can't walk anywhere. I had to go to a restaurant across the street, and there was a highway, and there was no place to cross. I had to take a taxi and drive for 10 minutes all around. So there's no sidewalks. There's no. So there are many things that can, and this is again something that I would hope that many in the longevity field would take to heart, is that, health is a continuum, longevity is a continuum. It doesn't start at the extreme, it starts by baby steps, and that, we all have a voice that could bring incredible power to the elected officials, saying this is the way we want to live.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great finishing for the session, and we're just a little bit over time. So thank you so much for being part of the panel, and I hope to see all of you back here at 7 for our party, for the rave.